Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Wings Podcast. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri. On today's show, we will meet Siddharth Patil, a hydrogeologist who is working on various aspects related to groundwater across India. In this role, he plays the educator, a field practitioner, and a facilitator for effective and efficient governance of aquifers. Problem solving, reading, traveling, and engaging with people both in the classroom as well as the field is what gives Siddharth a high. Welcome, Siddharth, to this episode of Wings Podcast.
Thank you. Really glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Siddharth, for coming on this show. So, let's begin quickly by understanding this word called aquifers.
So it's basically Greek. Aqui comes from aqua or water, and fair means to bear or to store. So basically, a rock formation that can hold and transmit water is known as an aquifer, and because it's a rock formation, it's holding this underground, we call that water as groundwater. So units of rocks which host groundwater are aquifers.
So, correct my understanding, Siddharth, if I am wrong, but from ancient times, civilizations have been seen to be formed around water bodies, especially rivers. Civilizations like the ancient, civilizations in the Middle East, Babylonian civilization, or coming back to here, Indus Valley civilization. So, has there been any history of groundwater or aquifer related establishment of human population in India? And how has it been seen by people living in this land over maybe thousands of years?
So, India is often, almost always described as a river valley civilization. But evidence definitely suggests that it's as much a groundwater civilization as it is a river valley civilization, simply because of the number of wells that we have today and the number of ancient wells. So even in the archaeological excavations of Dholavira, which is an Indus Valley site, there are wells which are almost 5,000 years old. So there is definitely a very long history of groundwater use in India. In fact, globally, one of the oldest wells that has been dated is on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean, where they found a skeleton in the well of a small girl, and this skeleton was dated to be at least 10,500 years old, which makes that dug well a source of groundwater way older than any source of organized surface water that we look at today. So use of groundwater is much older and well known to humans.
But then, groundwater is probably something which I don't see unless a well is dug or if there's a spring or anything which kind of naturally throws water from the Earth's bottom. But what I see is the river. Uh, I would like to believe there's a connection between the two. Does one feed the other? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, technically, we shouldn't be separating both of them. They're all part of the same water cycle. Just as, sometimes water's flowing on the surface, sometimes water's flowing underneath the surface, and they're extremely well connected. So if we take the Indian example, uh, it hardly rains 50 to 60 days in a year. I mean, that's like taking an upper estimate. In some parts of the country, it doesn't even rain those many days, and yet we've known our rivers to flow 365 days. So the rest of the days, 300 days of the year, the river is flowing only because of small seepages and springs feeding that river in the non-monsoon season when it doesn't rain. And what is this? This is a contribution of groundwater to the flow of the river. And because it is a groundwater contribution, it's actually called as base flow in English, mool pravaha in Hindi, which means it's the core of the river, it's the foundation of the river. Groundwater is established scientifically to be the main flow of a river in the non-monsoon season.
Yeah, I know. I have been a personal witness when bore wells are dug, and every time the bore well is dug, before the people actually start drilling, they do actually some puja,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and after they find water, there is a bigger puja that is performed. So somehow there seems to be some religious sentiments attached to discovery of underground water. I mean, are there any mythologies or folk tales associated with this? Because this seems to be going on for thousands of years, at least in India.
Yeah, so in the current set of stories of and mythologies that we look at, we don't really find groundwater, but we can interpret. So if we look at India, and if we look at all of the major rivers, whether it's Krishna, Godavari, Tapi, Narmada, Son, the Ganga, the origin of all of these major rivers is almost always a spring, a really small spring, which is nothing but groundwater emerging onto the surface. And this is celebrated, this is revered in the form of a Shiva temple at that particular site. So, even if you go to the smaller river basins or the more celebrated Shiva temples across India, you'll find that there's always some kind of a water source, which is why there is a Shiva temple. Now, this begs the question that, which came first? Did the water source, the spring, come first, or did the Shiva temple come first? I would like to believe the water source came first, and the religious practices were designed in order to protect, celebrate that source of water, which is so important to human life. In terms of symbology, because we have now become such a surface water centric culture, we think of the Ganges, the Ganga emerging from Shiva's Jata. But what if there is an alternative perspective where, given the background that I spoke about, that there is a Shiva temple at every spring, every origin of a river.
Trambakeshwar, for example, in near Nasik.
Correct.
Where river Godavari emerges.
Correct. Or Mahabaleshwar, where Krishna originates. Amarkantak, where Son and Narmada originate. So what if there is an alternate perspective to this, where Shiva's Jata actually represent layers of rocks, and the water which is emerging is a spring which has to be protected and revered. And not just in India, even in Islam, their most holy, revered spot is basically a well which is known, and the water of that well is known as Zamzam water, which is again groundwater. So across religions, across cultures, groundwater has been revered in different forms. There was a significant amount of mythology surrounding it, and I believe religion, the role of religion in this case is to protect that particular source, and to celebrate such a beautiful phenomenon which is keeping rivers and ecosystems alive.
As a hydrogeologist, your work takes you across different parts of India to the remotest corners. Have you actually first-hand experienced a mythology which is being practiced, which there is an underlying science to basically recognize and acknowledge the presence of underground water, but there is a religious mythology that is built around it? I don't know, anything that you can share with us?
I've actually been to some of the most beautiful sources or origins of rivers, but my personal favorite, there's not much of a mythology here, but my personal, I look at it as a pilgrimage, is traveling from the source to the mouth of a river, and not just as a religious pilgrimage, but
unlike the Narmada Pradakshina.
Correct, because I don't want to do it to get a pradakshina done, but I want to look at the river at its origin, where it's a beautiful, a pristine spring, just a very small seepage or a trickle, and then move along that river, looking at how it grows, how it's interacting with the different ecosystems around it, and then it becomes the monster or the huge quantity of water which near the mouth of it. So I have done this. The only river which I have seen from the source to the mouth is the Mahanadi, and it's truly a once in a lifetime experience, and I would really like to do this for a lot of rivers as a pilgrimage.
So, what happened in your Mahadani experience, if you can?
Oh, I went to some of the most untouched, pristine forests in India in Chhattisgarh. Uh, Extremely difficult to get there, given access is a problem. There are no places to stay, and I was there in peak summer, which made it worse. But
That's tribal region.
that's tribal region. It's almost at the Chhattisgarh Madhya Pradesh border, and this is Baikunthpur Sarguja district, and I mean that's a
Did you
forest.
encounter those tribals?
Yeah, work with them, not very different people from us. They are uh, you know not as traditional now as they were probably a few decades back. Now they have jobs in nearby towns, and or they're practicing some basic agriculture. So I mean, there are certain tribals in Chhattisgarh which are, uh, but they are protected by certain government laws, and you cannot visit those areas without special permission. So I haven't met those. But in these regions, the forests that I have seen are some of the best forests that I have seen in my life.
And you know, water, whether it is through the river source or the groundwater. I mean, for a layperson like me, what I understand is probably three broad usages or used cases, as they call it these days, for water. One is agriculture, second is drinking water, and probably third, what water required for industrial use. So, how do you see in India as we speak today the distribution for the demand for water in these three areas, and how are we as a nation coping with it? Because there seems to be a crisis across all the three. I mean, agriculture is craving, drinking water seems to be in perennial shortage,
Yeah.
industry seems to be willing to pay any price that is available to extract water from whatever sources. So, how is this war or unfettered demand for water for a billion plus country like India happening today?
So, just to quickly put things into perspective, India is the largest user of groundwater in the world. So much so that 25% of the world's groundwater usage is by India alone. Out of the 200 odd countries in the world, India uses 25% of the total groundwater use, just to put things into perspective.
Across the world.
Across the world. Yeah, across the world.
So that's the demand for groundwater in India.
Correct. And if you start including the subcontinent, if you include Pakistan and Bangladesh, it's a statistic which is mind-boggling, because Pakistan and Bangladesh have more or less the similar conditions, about which I will now talk about. So now, yes, we are the largest users of groundwater, but it's not just about the quantity, but it's also about how fast we got there. India wasn't the largest user of groundwater till about 1970s, late 70s, early 80s. But in the early 80s, when we began to start accessing groundwater, there was no stopping us, and we just shot up, and we left the whole world behind. The US and China combined together do not consume as much groundwater as we do.
So what happened in the late 70s, early 80s for this phenomena to happen in India?
So it isn't any one thing. There was two major events which happened. Number one was two massive droughts, one in eastern India, Bihar and West Bengal, and then also a famine in Maharashtra, and there was a massive drinking water crisis. And at that time, the government actually imported drilling rigs from, I believe it was the United Kingdom that time. Now, I'm sure all Indians are very, sorry, are very well known with the word jugaad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we saw these drilling rigs which came from the United Kingdom. Initially, there were a very few, I think there were only 3 rigs which came in. And, through jugaad, we reverse engineered and we made these rigs very cheap and cost effective, manufactured in India, largely in the state of Tamil Nadu. And then the second phenomenon which happened was an agricultural revolution was taking shape, which I would prefer to call as the chemical agriculture revolution, where in our belief that India wasn't self-sufficient in food, we brought in certain changes to agriculture, and this package of this new chemical practice of farming meant that a lot of water input was required. Now, this practice of farming was designed for Punjab and Haryana, which are traditionally well endowed with groundwater, and that's where also large canals and surface water dams were constructed to supply water.
Yeah, the Bhakra Nangal is there.
Correct.
The 5 rivers flow, and it's a water-rich zone.
Correct. So this whole package, high fertilizer input, high yielding varieties of crops, high water input, was designed for that region, which because of the Bhakra Nangal, the canals and the groundwater was water rich. But that same package was then picked up by the rest of the country, which is not necessarily as well endowed with groundwater or any other water resources as a Punjab and Haryana. And surface water resources, unlike the Bhakra Nangal, for Punjab, Haryana, took some time to develop in the other parts. So what did farmers do? They started trying to access groundwater. So this is the reason where in the 1980s we started to see a boom for groundwater. India's largest user of groundwater is agriculture. We have a lot of dams in India, but there is an inherent, I wouldn't call it a failure, but inherent gap in the efficient delivery of water to all the farmers in a command area of a dam. And a canal cannot reach each and every farmer. No matter how well you engineer it, there will always be issues, and there will always be allocation problems of, there isn't enough water for each and every one.
And there is politics around it. Like,
correct.
For example, the Kaveri water fight, which is perennially on between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka.
The Krishna water fight and Godavari water fight, each and every state is fighting with each other on water. So, it's not so much a water quantity problem as it is a political, a social, and a policy problem. So our whole agricultural policy has revolved around wheat and rice and sugarcane, cotton, chickpea, which are all heavy water guzzling crops. And we tend to blame the farmers. We as citizens living in cities, we look at popular media and we feel that why are farmers cultivating these crops which take up so much water? And sugarcane, for example, isn't even a food crop.
Yes.
One can actually criticize rice and wheat less because they are food crops. Sugarcane isn't even a food crop. But what we must realize is these crops have not come in and have not spread across India in the last 3 decades just like that. The farmers didn't pick these. the entire ecosystem of agriculture, whether it is the seeds, the research around seeds, which almost always happens in government institutions, the fertilizer availability, the credit for farmers to, take loans, etc., the marketplace where the farmers are going to sell, the assured guaranteed price by the government to farmers, all of this revolves around these few crops. And the farmers are almost forced to pick these crops to remain in the cycle of, revolving credit.
And there is this whole corporatization of farming, which has also been at play, not directly but indirectly, through, let's say, supply of designed and manufactured seeds
So just
and fertilizers and chemicals, where there is now big industrial companies who are driving this mechanism, and somehow the economic imperative, correct me if I'm wrong, seems to be driving the show rather than the fundamental imperative of efficient and effective farming. I don't know whether am I saying this right?
No, you are perfectly right. So just as an example, all of us enjoy potato chips.
Yes.
What we don't realize is those potatoes are highly, the potato seed is actually provided by the company who's manufacturing those chips to the farmer, and the farmer is assured of a certain price by that company for those potatoes.
But then, is there an unintended price or unintended consequence of all this relating to the extraction of groundwater then?
Correct. There is. So, like you said, the economic option is the economics supersedes everything else.
So the price that we are paying for the economic growth in that sense is actually the invisible cost of ineffective use of water resources.
Correct.
So
Perfect,
at least in these three buckets, Siddharth, agriculture, drinking water, and let's say industrial use, is there at least one bucket where we as a country are doing good?
Not really. I'll come to the good in some time, but for the moment, I'll just look at drinking water crisis. 85 to 90% of India's rural drinking water comes from groundwater. That's massive.
That's wells, tube wells,
Springs,
okay.
bore wells. This is a massive figure. Please try to understand that. Any problem which happens in rural regions with groundwater is going to affect their drinking water. Industrial water, completely unregulated. I mean, within their campus, yes, they need a license to pump a lot of groundwater. But, industries, or it be urban cities like Pune or Mumbai, where...
Bangalore city.
Oh yes,
gets
Bangalore.
so much of water extracted from groundwater. I remember, I was doing my engineering in Bangalore in the 80s, and I was staying in a small, house where the owner dug a well when we were living there, and we found water at 40 feet.
Wow.
And a very close friend of mine who is into construction business in Bangalore, and for all his construction sites he requires water.
Yeah.
And in today 2022, when I ask him at what levels do you get your water, he says nothing less than 1200 feet.
Correct.
So what was 40 feet has gone down to 1200 feet in a matter of, say, 30-40 years.
That's the price we pay for unregulated, unthoughtful, unplanned growth of water. I mean, so, I might come across as anti-development, but I am not. I'm not saying don't develop your cities, don't grow into a global IT hub like Bangalore has. What I am saying is just plan your water resources beforehand. Understand the system, the natural system, and then plan accordingly.
So as a hydrogeologist working in this field for now, I think more than a decade.
Yes.
In the organization that you work for, what is the nature of problem you guys focus on solving?
So, the first problem is defining the problem itself. When it comes to groundwater, given the diversity, so India is not just a socially diverse country; it's a geographically and geologically diverse country.
What do you mean by that?
Our Earth has, a lot of types of rocks, and 80% of those types of rocks are found in India, just in one country.
Really?
Yeah. So now,
So is it a good news or a bad news?
it's good because you can go and see all these beautiful rocks, but it's bad from a groundwater perspective because if there is so much diversity in rock types, your groundwater occurrence and distribution, its properties are going to be that much different, because each rock will have different properties to hold, and therefore how groundwater flows, whether it flows slow or fast, how much can groundwater be stored in a particular rock, all is going to be different. So India is extremely diverse, and therefore it becomes very difficult to look at challenges with groundwater from a centralized, a central perspective. Each village is going to have its own challenges.
We have a Ministry of Water Resources, the Central Water Commission, which has been around for, I think, a couple of decades now. I'm sure they would be holding a body of data and knowledge around the diversity that you speak of.
Yes, so we have a Central Water Commission which is largely looking after the surface water, and embedded in the Central Water Commission we have a Central Groundwater Board which looks after groundwater of India. They're doing decent work, they have assessments of groundwater, etc. But unfortunately their scale is not very representative. So they're looking at a block level, a tehsil or a taluka level, and that really doesn't represent the reality at the village.
But the
scale.
state governments also chip in, right? I mean, at each state government they have an irrigation department and a water department.
So unfortunately not every state has a groundwater department of its own. But just as an example, Maharashtra has a groundwater survey and development agency. Maharashtra is one of the few states to have a law on groundwater which talks about regulating groundwater. But just consider this, that there are millions of wells in Maharashtra, and the responsibility of implementing the law is with the district collector. What can that one person do if there are hundreds of thousands, hundreds of lakhs of wells within that district? There's just no way to regulate groundwater. It doesn't matter how many laws you make.
So then, if I own a piece of land, let's say as a farmer, and there is water underneath, I mean, from an ownership perspective, it's mine, right?
That's the common perception, and
I can irrigate my farm or field with that, and if I have excess, I can probably sell it through the canal system. I think there's already a mechanism already in place, isn't it? So where is the problem, if there is one?
That is the core crux of the problem, if I may say so, where my land, my water is the perception that we have in India, and the legal perception also is similar, that when it comes to groundwater, my land and my water is fine. But also remember one thing, if the groundwater depletes too much, the collector also has the powers to restrict groundwater usage. So there is this contradiction in how the state behaves conveniently. I believe this is political. No politician in this country is going to touch individuals' right and access to groundwater. I don't see anything happening with that. But so groundwater, whether it's groundwater, whether it's surface water, they do not follow administrative boundaries. You have river basins, and you rightly pointed out these fights which are happening between, on the Kaveri, on the Krishna, on the Godavari, between different states, because water doesn't follow administrative boundaries, and our assessments, our planning, management is all happening at administrative boundaries. So unless we look at water resource at its unit, for surface water it is river basins, or at a smaller level we call them watersheds. For groundwater it is aquifers. Unless we start understanding groundwater at the aquifer scale, we really can't talk about governing or managing
But
this.
Siddharth, I mean, let's look at the way nature sustains itself, right? For example, let's take fisheries. Okay, let's say a certain part of ocean, let's say in the coast next to Cochin in Kerala, there is a lot of fishing that happens there. And of course, there is a fish generation capacity of the ocean. I mean, I was just reading this article somewhere that there is a certain fish generating capacity of the ocean. Let's say it generates 100 fishes a year, for argument's sake. As long as the fishing is restricted to 100 or less through various mechanisms, the fishery or the fishery ecosystem will sustain by itself. I mean, is that phenomena also playing out in groundwater where through rain and through various other sources, there is groundwater rejuvenation or repletion happening, and as long as we extract equal to that rate or less, we should be good. I mean, is there an imbalance that is playing out which is creating opportunities and work for you guys?
Yes. I mean, ideally, I would not like to look at it as generating work for us.
Okay, let me rephrase. What I'm trying to say is it is creating a problem, this imbalance of the natural rejuvenation of underground and the rate of extraction is creating an imbalance. And that is a problem that you and your organization are hoping to somehow address and solve?
Correct. In a way, yes. But not always just trying to solve problems. So I'll just come to the problem later. We are also looking at regions which are bright spots, the feel good regions of India and even the rest of the world where things are not always bad.
In fact, you were telling me when we spoke the other day about a very successful project that you did in the state of Sikkim.
Correct.
So what was that? I mean, if you can take that as an example, I think we can understand what you're trying to say here.
Yeah. So my organization, which is Aquadam, and a partner organization with People Science Institute from Dehradun, we worked with the government of Sikkim on reviving springs in that particular state. And the model there was we trained the government department staff, so what we call as line departments, and across different departments. There was rural development, there was State Institute of Rural Development, there was Forest Department, etc. We trained them to map and implement spring shed management. And
what does that mean?
Understand how your springs are emerging, why they are emerging, through what system of rocks, and where do you put in groundwater so that you most effectively recharge that spring because it's groundwater. So understanding how to identify that area, and then what do you do in that particular area? Do you construct a small check dam, or do you make small recharge pits, considering the stability of the slope because it is Sikkim, it is hilly terrain? What is it that you can do to sustain your spring even in a changing climate that we are looking at today?
Oh, that's a big 800-pound gorilla, climate change, where we have not even taken into account.
Correct. World over, science has always in fact looked at groundwater as a buffer to climate vagaries.
Okay.
All your regular use should not deplete groundwater so much that if the next year or the year after that is a drought, you do not have your basic drinking water. So just alluding to what you were saying earlier, that we need to first understand at our village level how much, or at a ward in a city, how much groundwater is available, and look at how much surface water is available. And then that is our bank account.
And then what is the demand thereafter?
Correct. We aren't working this way. We are working the other way around. That my demand, Pune city's demand is X, and then I have to ensure that we get this water from wherever possible.
So then you're framing the whole problem as a supply side problem and
Correct.
not as a demand side problem.
Correct.
So probably what you're trying to say is there's not enough focus or attention given to the demand side of the equation, that if we can effectively question and regulate the demand, hopefully the groundwater could suffice us.
It's a big solution to the groundwater crisis.
And also, from what I gathered from you when you said about the Sikkim example, is the problem has to be studied at a localized, let's say, gram panchayat or a block level, and probably local solutions may have to be identified and implemented. Or this seems to be a all hands to the deck, all inclusive, decentralized model that you are probably alluding to then.
Yes, see, like I
As
said,
a way forward. Unlike
definitely.
the centralized water commission model that we have.
See, the model that we are talking about, and in fact, a lot of people in the world are now talking about, is that given the kind of diversity we have in India in terms of physical, natural, biophysical systems, and people who are dependent on those natural systems are so diverse, socioeconomically and politically, we have to study the problems at the local level. The solutions have to emerge at the local level. They cannot come from the central level. We have to look at water across administrative bodies, and we cannot have the government looking at water from an ownership perspective. They are the trustees of water. They have to be the public trust of water and not the owners. The ownership has to be with the community which is dependent on that water. And finally, the governance of water has to be participatory, it has to be equitable, and it has to happen at that community level, whether it's a village in a gram panchayat or it's a ward in a city.
This sounds like a language of a warrior crusader to me. In doing what you are doing, if I were to ask myself, what is it that Siddharth Patil is doing? Yes, he is working as a hydrogeologist, as a practitioner in the field, but it sounds to me that in some way there is a warrior or some crusade that is on. And, in a generic way, a warrior crusader has to undergo a lot of agony and frustration in doing what he or she wants to do. So, what are in your work? What are your personal agonies and frustrations that you face, where you tear your hair apart?
On a slightly lighter note, if you may allow.
This is a little personal thing, okay, Siddharth, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind this. There were some frustrations, and I've grown also to be able to handle some things. But just as an example, no one in my family understood what I did.
Do they understand it now?
Most probably don't, even today. And another aspect is in India, NGO means jhola wala, a sling bag, cotton kurta, and what does an NGO do? Just social mobilization. And there's just no way that people believe that an NGO can do science of the highest quality. And Westerners have acknowledged our work, but one of the biggest frustrations is that the Indian academic scene is such that an NGO is rarely, even the government will always look at the data coming from an NGO with some kind of suspicion.
But there is this German organization that you are collaborating and partnering with, who seem to be trusting you with their work.
They do. So there are Germans, there are Swiss, there are American foundations and scientists, Australian scientists, and they believe in our work. They believe in the data being collected by our village representative. We call them community representatives. They do, but the formal education system, the formal government databases are still showing resistance to accept it.
So somehow what is happening is you and your work will probably get acknowledged and respected if people in Europe or US starts acknowledging, which is again a sad commentary here. But just as we are kind of coming to the end of this conversation, I just wanted to know, I'm just going a little personal here, is this what you always wanted to do, Siddharth, in life?
Not
or
really.
Has this profession happened to you?
It has happened to me. In my BSc geology, I came across my organization, as a bachelor's intern, it's a very unique concept. No one gives internships in BSc. I got an opportunity, and the first time I was shown a well, I was told a dug well talks to you. It talks to you. It talks to you about its water level, current water level. It shows you its highest water level. It shows you the summer water level. It shows you the rocks. It's just beautiful. This concept of a dug well talking to you, and for me, the dug well is a technology. It's actually a technology that has sustained for the last 10,000 years. You can call it primitive technology, but it is effective and efficient technology which has remained as it is with very little change for the last 10,000 years.
But if there's one thing that has attracted you to this field and which somehow seems to be energizing you, what would that one thing be? Why are you doing what you're doing?
I mean, there's some sort of a contentment you get that you're trying to help solve the water problem. Just the thought that you might be a small part of the solution which will eventually come in solving the water problem of this country.
Are you a romantic idealist then?
I would, yes, but I also am a realist, where I know that I also know the limit of the efforts, and not to worry too much and just keep going on without worrying about the results. I believe in the approach more than the in what's happening as final outcomes, because outcomes, when it comes to groundwater, when it comes to water, there's just too many externalities. So without worrying for outcome, we know the process and just keep following the process.
So there is a romantic at play, yet a romantic who is pragmatic at the same time.
Yes, because the pragmatism is required to be sane, to keep yourself sane.
And if the pragmatist in you were to say something to you right now, what would he say to you?
Keep at it. Just don't think about what is happening, what policies are coming. Don't worry about who's saying what.
Because
just keep at it.
As an image, what is coming to my mind as I look at you and your work is like a candle which is burning itself up in order to give light. And at some point in time, the wax will end and the wick will end. Hopefully before that, another candle will take the light up and the show will continue. Looks like this seems to be a never ending process.
That's exactly the model which my organization follows, where we do not work alone ever. We always work in partnerships with local partners on the ground, in villages, in cities.
Who are those multiple candles whom you light up?
That's exactly what we want to do. That we want to make ourselves redundant, but we want the science to continue all throughout through this model of partnerships.
So the storytellers may go, the actors may go, but the story has to continue. Is what you're trying to say.
Yes.
Siddharth, this has been a very, very eye-opening and mind-opening conversation, because I don't think you get to listen to subjects like these from experts like you, who are probably fighting a relentless, endless battle. And it is leaving me actually with more questions in my mind than probably answers. But I'm actually tempted to offer you a small gift if you're okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a surprise, but yeah.
And the gift actually is a 4-line Hindi poem which I read just, I think, 3 or 4 days back in some context. Incidentally, the poet is the ex-education minister of Government of India. He was an education minister of Government of India till I think 2 or 3 years back. His name is Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank, and he's written this beautiful line which somehow I'm kind of tempted to offer you as a gift. And the lines he's written goes like this: तू कोशिश तो कर ये बुझी शमा फिर जल सकती है। तूफानों से घिरी कश्ती बचाने को किनारों में हलचल मच सकती है।
It's beautiful. I mean, very motivating and definitely helps to keep it going.
So looks like the groundwater situation picture that you're probably uh, trying to portray and share through your work seems to be like a tufano se ghiri kashti, a boat which is caught in turbulent water. But if you keep on doing what you are doing, at some point in time, people on the shores will realize the work that you guys are doing and offer the rope of help and participate in your work, if I can say so.
Yeah, I think that is also another core principle where, unless the people who are engaging with, who are using water, who are dependent, unless they engage, we will not be able to govern water.
Absolutely. I think water is a universal issue, and I think nobody can take this God-given resource for granted, according to me. And I think at least if we can focusing on the demand side or my consumption side. I mean, I don't know what is the supply side, but even if as a consumer, if I focus on my own demands, I think I may have helped you and your cause in that sense.
Yes. Yes.
So
definitely.
thank you very much for coming on the Wings podcast to share this very unique and a very different story. And this has really given me a lot of hope and excitement that young Indians like you are focusing in doing this, taking up this cause as a, if I can call it, an Aquifer warrior crusader, that kind of work. But as we end the conversation, if I were to ask you, what are your thoughts and feelings, and how has this conversation been for you?
It's been wonderful, although it's a very complex issue to put across, and I am sure I've missed a lot, but I've tried to put across as much as I could. And just one small thing that I really like to say here, that all of this is just like the candle example. There are many candles which have come before me, and
You have drawn light from.
correct, from whom I've drawn light from. And yeah, I just hope to make a small dent in this, whether it is solving an issue or whether it is governing water where it is still in a good shape. In both cases, just hope to make a dent in whatever possible way.
So, on this note, let me wish you good luck and success in your work as an educator, a field practitioner, and a facilitator on the subject of effective and efficient groundwater management and governance. Thank you very much for coming on the show. God bless you, and may the force be with you.
Thank you. May the force be with you too.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you for your time today, my dear listeners. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri, signing off. Goodbye, take care, and stay safe. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as a piece of any professional advice. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of its guest. Creators of this podcast expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any direct or indirect, consequential or other damages arising out of any individual's use of this podcast. For feedback and suggestions, please write to wingsindia75@gmail.com. Thank you.